Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. For more than a decade, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration dismissed real-world stories of adult smokers switching to vaping as mere anecdote, insisting instead on randomized control trials and population-level data before allowing nicotine vaping products to remain on the market. That posture held even after the Cochrane review concluded, with high certainty evidence, that nicotine vapes help people quit smoking more effectively than traditional nicotine replacement therapies like patches or gum. Now, under a new administration that promised to save vaping, the FDA Commissioner himself is discarding national surveillance data and replacing it with anecdote. Joining us today to help unpack what's going on here is Dr. Arielle Selya, a behavioral scientist at Pinney Associates, a U.S.-based firm that provides consulting services on tobacco harm reduction to Juul Labs. She also serves as a scientific advisor to the Global Forum on Nicotine. Dr. Selya, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me back.
So you've spent years pushing back on weak or overstated claims in tobacco control research. At a high level, what does it take to keep a scientific field honest once it becomes politically charged?
Yeah, it's hard to bring back once it's gotten this far, especially with the polarization and people like me that work for industry and try to publish published studies. We don't have a platform anymore in many journals and many conferences. So I think we need to push back on flawed research and try to keep producing our own research and getting the message out. And I think we also need the right incentive structures for academic research.
How do you mean by that?
At the moment, there are some really good pro-THR academics working within that space to produce good research and try to make bridges with the other side. But if you're an academic and you're very anti-vaping or anti-nicotine, there's no incentive. Nobody's going to make you talk to the other side. It's fine to kind of keep in your own bubble, and the structures that reward research right now just reward grant and paper productivity, and there's little to no incentive to talk across to the other side.
So once a dramatic vaping study gets published, how hard is it to actually correct the record? And why do so many flawed items just stick?
It's very difficult and time consuming. There's a law called Brandolini's Law where it takes an order of magnitude more effort to refute something. And that's definitely the case here. So I have not been involved in a retraction myself, but I've been involved in getting lesser corrections out there, such as corresponding with the authors to have them request a correction, such as letters to the editor, where I publish a letter critiquing their study and the authors respond, and pub peer comments as well if the more formal avenues don't work. And it takes a lot of effort, not only to reanalyze the data, if that's a possibility, because many of these papers use publicly available data sets, and some of the flaws don't even come out until you're working with the data in the software and seeing huge discrepancies between what you're seeing and what's published in the paper. But not only writing and reanalyzing takes a lot of time, but also going through those formal channels to try to get a corrective action. So usually I will try first with a letter to the editor and submit that to the journal and see if they have any interest in publishing a critique of a previous paper they published. Often the answer is no. It usually gets a swift desk rejection without going out for peer review. But sometimes it is successful. And then from there, I kind of go down the list, and often it ends up as a pub peer comment.
And Dr. Selya, there was a recent retracted paper that has gotten some attention on the tobacco harm reduction side. I've got it up here right now. Effect comparison of e-cigarette and traditional smoking and association with stroke. Describe to us what this paper was communicating and what's the issue about it being retracted.
So the original paper analyzed a publicly available U.S. data set called NHANES, and they claimed to find an association between e-cigarette use and stroke. And when this was first published, it was the basis for some anti-vaping public health campaigns, and it's been cited in meta-analyses since that pool it with other studies as part of a statement claiming cardiovascular risk from vaping. So I wasn't involved in the efforts to get this retracted, but my colleagues Flo Foxon at Pinney Associates and Gal Cohen at Rose Research did a lot of their own effort looking into first reanalyzing the data set, and they found a tenfold discrepancy between the reported sample size and what's actually available in NHANES. So, like, to get into specifics, each wave of NHANES has about 20,000 participants, and they were reporting in the paper 200,000. And it's not really clear how they got such a discrepancy. It's possible they merged the data incorrectly, or these days you never know if something's been AI generated. But either way, it's a huge discrepancy. It's not just a rounding error or missing an exclusion criteria that they forgot to include in the study. It's a huge glaring issue. That was only the beginning of it, though. It wasn't just methodological issues with this study. There was actually fraudulent behavior on behalf of the authors. So the lead author, Urvish Patel, claimed to have an affiliation that he actually didn't have. So he said he was associated with a school of medicine that he was not employed by. And it was also part of a suspected paper mill, where an organization offers research experiences. And some of these can be legitimate, but the paper mill ones are not. It's essentially where prospective or actual, usually medical or dental students, people in their early stages of their career who are trying to pad their CV, they pay a couple $1,000s for a research experience, which is essentially no more than just having their name on the author list of a paper without the actual research experience being done. And there's a couple tells to this, a couple clues for what might be a paper mill. One clue is that there's far more authors on the paper than are actually needed. So on a paper like this that's simply analyzing publicly available data, really one author could do it by themselves, but typically if there's a mentoring situation there, it could be up to 3 authors. I think anything more than that is a little excessive, and this had I'll have to go back and check, but a lot more than was necessary. And the other clue is that each author is from a different institution. And you would wonder, like, how do these people know each other? They're geographically dispersed. They have different departments and different affiliations that they're working in. And it's all because they're paying into this research organization that's pumping out paper mill papers.
Is it true to say that many of the flaws that are found in these studies are the same ones that reliably inflate risk and drive public panic?
Yeah, it's the same flaws. It's the same recurring flaws. So I think probably the most common category of retracted papers is looking at e-cigarette use and some health outcome. In this case, stroke, but it's been shown in other health outcomes too. And they all more or less have the same flaws, which is that you don't know the directionality. You don't know if they had the health condition first and then started vaping. Maybe it's a reverse causality. Maybe if they were experiencing smoking-related health effects, then that motivated them to switch to vaping, but they still have the lingering effects from prior smoking. So then that's the other piece, is these papers don't usually adequately account for the effect of prior smoking and separate that cleanly from the vaping.
But there is good science out there, with solid data, is there not?
Oh, yes. There's some good papers.
And isn't one of those tools, has been historically the National Youth Tobacco Survey?
Yes, and it's been a great data source that's been the subject of many papers, good quality papers and not so good quality papers, but it's an extremely valuable data source that everybody relies on, academic researchers, government, and even industry.
So tell us, who in government, in the U.S. government, controls the NYTS, and, how does that survey get prepared and released?
The NYTS is the National Youth Tobacco Survey, and that's a survey conducted by the CDC every year for many years now. It's the most often used tool for youth surveillance. So back in the day, it used to track cigarette smoking and other nicotine and tobacco products, and it still does. But starting in 2011, it added e-cigarette use, which makes it the longest running nationally representative U.S. survey to see what youth are doing.
I think it's important to be clear here with our viewers because, of course, the NYTS has been discussed at length on our show because it was the survey used by the FDA and CDC and the media to declare a youth vaping epidemic, was it not?
Yes, that's probably the primary source. There are other surveys that look at this too, but NYTS seems to be the one that's most often relied on for these claims of the vaping epidemic and youth use.
So at the time, those NYTS numbers were treated as authoritative, driving headlines, panic, and policy, especially flavor bans.
Sometimes they use statistical techniques to put some spin on the numbers. So you mentioned flavors. The way they asked flavors and the way that they reported flavors in the official NYTS reports are the percent of past month users that use flavors. But this is easy to misinterpret, and the media has misinterpreted this as a percentage of all youth. So in the last NYTS, the most recently available, it was about 6% of youth used e-cigarettes. So if you think about 80% of those 6%, that's a pretty small number, but it's reported as 80% of past month vapors use flavors.
2019 starts to get into youth use at alarming levels, and they really call out the percentage. Now, it's true, in 2019, the percentage of high school e-cigarette use among teenagers was 27.5%. That's for sure. Now, here is the same year in the promotional material FDA pushed out with regards to that data. Then we hit 2020, and what you have to see in the data is that already by 2020, they're starting to dip in teen use, and you don't see those percentages called out in the 2020 literature. This is 2021, and we had to dig for this breakdown in 2021 to actually really see the numbers, and you can see it's starting to drop. But none of this makes it to the 2021 promotional materials from the FDA. And this is what's maddening, because 2019, youth vaping epidemic is declared 27.5% of high school students are vaping. By 2021, it's 11.3%.
Yeah, it's a big decline. And you showed 2020 earlier. That is one year that's not comparable to the others because they had some changes to their methodology due to COVID. So the 2020 point can't be accurately compared with the others, but that's really the only exception. And I think the COVID methodology was used at first to say, oh, well, we're not really sure if there's a decrease because it was a COVID year and the methodology was different. But certainly by 2024, it's a lot lower still. So there's no denying the decline now.
Here's the 2024 numbers, and that's down to 5.9%. So in 2019, as I understand it, the proper number to use is 20% of all high school students used.
All middle and high school students.
Middle and high school students used e-cigarettes, so nicotine vapes. What did the number drop to in 2024, and is it significant?
5.9% in 2024, so it's over a 60% decline, and that absolutely is a statistically significant difference.
And it's really important for us to hang on this number because this is the last number that we've had. Why?
Yes, there have been disruptions to NYTS. I'm not sure if we'll see any other data beyond 2024, but typically the release schedule for the data is that they publish a CDC paper in September or October showing the overall results for that year. And then a couple months later, or sometimes up to 6 months later, they release the raw data so that if you want to look at something more detailed, like combinations of device type and flavor, for example, you can analyze the raw data. But we have yet to see the 2024 raw data, and 2025 overall results are well overdue.
Which brings us to FDA Commissioner Marty Makary. Makary was appointed by President Trump in early 2025, and he took the helm in April as U.S. FDA Commissioner. In an interview he gave this past October, he dismisses National Youth Survey data outright and replaces it with anecdote. I'm sure many of our viewers have not seen these clips, so I've got 3 clip packages for us to watch. Here's the first.
I want to ask you about vape shops. I see them pop up everywhere. We talked about California, but I see them honestly all over the country.
During the Biden administration, there was a mass proliferation of vape and smoke shops and gas stations selling illegal Chinese vaping products. We walked into this realizing, hey, what's going on here? These vape shops are popping up in every corner in America like mushrooms, and no one really understands them or talks about them. Turns out 85% of the vape products are illegal Chinese vape products. Some of them are designed to make kids addicted. It's everywhere, and just remember, there is no fruity flavored vape product that is legal in the United States. That's most of what's in these stores. And so you have all of these illegal products sold on every corner in America, in every neighborhood, and no one talked about it. No one understood it. And so we walked into a mess. And I quickly did some research. We were just in Chicago announcing the largest raid to date of illegal Chinese vaping products. I was doing some research on that greater Chicago area. They have 100 Starbucks in that area and 1,200 vape shops and smoke shops and other retailers selling these illegal vaping products. They're everywhere. They're dominating our society. They're around military bases. They're around college campuses. This is an epidemic that has been in part a silent epidemic, but it's starting to destroy lives. And it's not just the vape products. It's opioids. You can walk into these vape shops and literally buy an opioid. It's called concentrated 7-OH or hydroxymetragenine. It goes by several names. We call it collectively 7-OH or hydroxy. It is 13 times more potent than morphine, and you can walk into one of these vape shops in America and buy it like a cup of coffee. We have got to wake up.
And anybody could just open a vape shop and start selling illegal drugs to children?
They're popping up everywhere, yes. And there are drugs in there.
Dr. Selya, what do you make of this first clip and Commissioner Makary's language and his framing?
Nobody wants kids to be using any substances. I think we can all agree on that. But there's a lot of conflation in the responses. So just because there's a lot of shops selling vape products, it doesn't mean that kids are using them, because a lot of adults use them too. And for them, it's a harm reduction tool. I think there's also, it's lacking a recognition about product substitution, because he counts up the number of vape stores in the Chicago area, but what about the number of stores selling cigarettes? Because that happens at every convenience store too, and sometimes pharmacies and grocery stores.
Commissioner Makary more than suggests youth vaping must be widespread because vape shops are everywhere. Is that sound reasoning?
It conflates youth and adults. Just because these stores exist, it doesn't mean, in fact, they shouldn't be selling to kids. They should be age gated. It's not always successful. But the fact is, a lot of adults use these products too, and it's for a good reason, to help them switch away or keep away from cigarettes.
Okay, here's clip number 2, and this gets straight to the heart of the NYTS matter. Let's have a listen.
Anybody who is watching this that knows a teenage child is aware of the epidemic of vaping in our country. And I have to imagine that it's not good for kids. Is there anything that you guys can do on the FDA front to fight this prevalent epidemic of vaping?
What else is in those vaping devices? Formaldehyde sometimes, heavy metals like lead. So we have stories now of high schools that say once a month a kid goes to the hospital, sometimes in an ambulance, because of popcorn lung. We hear stories of individuals that have quit their lives, that have gone down a very dark road because they have to steal in order to get these vaping devices. We hear kids that are not attending class because they're in the boys' bathroom where they keep the vaping pens in the tiles in the ceiling because it's off the radar of the school. This is an epidemic in the United States, and nobody was paying attention to it until President Trump came into office. And one of the reasons why we were asleep at the wheel as a medical establishment is that the CDC put out a shoddy study that said that only 5% of young people are using vaping products. And they'll claim that that's the lowest level in a decade. What they don't tell you is the study survey was methodologically flawed. And you talk to any high school in America and they will tell you 30%, 40%, 50% of the kids in that school are regularly using these products. They're addictive. Kids go down the addictive pathway of lying, cheating, stealing, even from their own family and loved ones, of living a dual life. And there are tragic stories of kids that have gone to the hospital because of what's in these things.
Boy, Dr. Selya, is the NYTS a shoddy, flawed study?
No, NYTS is probably the best study that we have that goes back the longest period of time to track trends in nicotine and tobacco use among youth. Is it perfect? No. You can nitpick on the methodology and some of the survey questions, but it's not so flawed that you just throw away the entire thing. I really am curious about what flaw he's referring to. The only one that really comes to mind is the 2020 exception, because the survey methodology changed then. And when you're designing a survey, it makes a lot of difference how you identify the people that you want to be participants, how you ask the questions, and how they respond to the questions. Like, are they giving their answers to another person? Are they taking it privately on a computer? All those things can affect the answers. And the important thing about NYTS is that it's been very consistent, except for the 1 year in 2020 because of COVID restrictions. Other than that, it's very consistent, so you can see the trends. And I mentioned there are other national surveys that track youth use, and they all come up with slightly different numbers. So like, would I hang my hat on the exactly 5.9%? Not necessarily, but what's important is that it's consistent over the years and you can track the trends, because the same methodology was used in 2019 and 2024.
So, but isn't the commissioner disregarding all data pretty much and relying solely on anecdote? Like, listen to any principal at any high school and they'll tell you it's 30, 40, 50%. I mean, this is the person who leads the health department for the United States of America.
Right. Yeah, that does seem based on anecdote, and I'm not sure what he's referring to with the methodologically flawed part.
So is it fair to throw out the NYTS in favor of anecdote?
No, the NYTS is incredibly valuable to everybody. FDA relies on it when they're evaluating PMTA applications. Industry relies on it to try to minimize the problem of youth vaping. And academic researchers use it all the time to publish papers on it.
It just seems pretty convenient that when the numbers stop making sense for panic and alarm, that it's, been dismissed.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a problem. And especially we're concerned about the future of NYTS. I don't know if we'll get a 2025 and beyond. And that'll be really damaging because we won't know what's going on with youth vaping. I mean, we can rely on other surveys, but we won't have that long historical context.
The implications he was making with regard to vaping nicotine being something that you steal for and you live two lives and your life changes and so forth. I mean, what is that?
I don't know. I don't know of any data that's looked at that. I can't say it doesn't happen, but I think there's a lot of misinformation in that. Like popcorn lung, for example, that's said monthly people are going to the hospital for popcorn lung. That's a myth, unless he's conflating nicotine vaping with THC vaping, which he might be, because there have been injuries from that.
Well, we certainly know that the CDC had no problem conflating nicotine vaping and THC vaping during the E-Valley crisis.
Right, and that seems to be still conflated.
Yeah, it seems to me that the commissioner has fallen prey to many of the myths over the last 10 years that have been pushed out by anti-vaping propagandists.
Yeah, it's a shame to hear that kind of misinformation repeated, because misinformation is a big problem in the US and many other countries. Most people incorrectly believe that e-cigarettes are just as bad or worse, and that's not supported by the evidence.
Okay, we have one more clip package, and for me, it's icing on the cake. Let's have a listen.
I'd imagine that anybody watching this would say, well, it's probably better to smoke a vape than a cigarette because cigarettes will cause lung cancer, and there's studies behind cigarettes and lung cancer. Are there serious studies that doctors are taking seriously about the dangers of whatever content there is inside the vape? Because I haven't heard about those. I've always heard, well, it's probably better than the alternative, or it's not that bad, or I'm buying it from a reputable source. I mean, I see people walking around with vapes all over the place.
I talk to doctors about what's in the vape stores, and they say, I don't know. I ask them, what % of high school kids are vaping? They say, I don't know. Talk to a high schooler, they'll tell you 20 to 50%. I ask the doctors, what % of the vape products have THC? They say, I don't know. It may be a third or more. I ask them, what are the other ingredients in these vape products? They say, I don't know. So it is true that if you are using an FDA-approved vape product, which is designed to transition people from combustible cigarettes to another form of nicotine delivery, where you're getting nicotine delivered in a way where we know what the chemicals are in that product, that it is less dangerous than combustible cigarettes. That is true. But what we are seeing is an epidemic of young kids vaping from scratch, not transitioning from cigarettes. And they're vaping with illegal products where we have no idea what those chemicals are. And when somebody comes into the hospital, we have no idea what's causing the lung damage.
So he's using doctors' lack of knowledge about nicotine vapes as a factual point to prove what?
The point that it makes to me is that the market is very unregulated and that there's a lot of conflation of nicotine vaping with cannabis vaping. It is a valid concern if people are vaping and they don't know what's in their product, but that could be easily addressed if the market were regulated, because you mandate labeling requirements.
So doesn't the FDA have a responsibility to answer these questions for doctors? And fairly and correctly, I might add.
Yes, and there's been some academic messaging studies testing out how to correct people's misperceptions. And one of them, I remember, found they tested out different sources of a claim that e-cigarettes are less harmful than cigarettes. And if the claim was attributed as coming from FDA, then it was seen as more credible to the participants. So public health organizations, and including FDA, have a responsibility to accurately communicate risk, and they can also be more effective at it because they are trusted.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that FDA officials over the years have paid lip service to communicating the continuum of risk, mostly at like conferences and so forth. But we've never seen any national campaign or program or initiative to accurately communicate risk around nicotine vape products.
Right. The recent change has been they do have a page now on relative risk at the FDA, but it's certainly not as prominent, and I don't see it yet making its way out into the public sphere.
Dr. Selya, do we see the same pattern? Alarm first, evidence second, visible in WHO messaging and Bloomberg-funded advocacy?
A lot of that messaging is definitely focused on the harm rather than the harm reduction. And in some cases, I don't think evidence follows at all. You said evidence second, but in some cases, there's no evidence at all, just kind of perpetuating some of these harmful misperceptions. And it's less severe in the academic literature, but I do see that as well, more of a focus on the harm rather than the harm reduction. So if a paper performs 10 analyses and 2 of them come out as potentially negative, those are the 2 that get reported in the abstract. So it's kind of a selective reporting.
Okay, Dr. Selya, help me walk away from the edge here. In your mind, are there any bright spots when it comes to nicotine policy in the U.S.?
I think so. I think the FDA just announced a fast track for nicotine pouches to go through the PMTA process. And I think that's a great sign that at least some people at the FDA value harm reduction.
And despite all this, you've stayed engaged in this work. What would it actually look like for science to reassert itself here and for evidence to start guiding policy again?
I think as much of a slog as it is sometimes, it's important for researchers to keep producing good science. For people like me, it's getting harder to publish, but we still have some options to get our science out there. And I think any science consumer can help too by calling out bad research, whether it's writing a formal letter to the editor or posting a community note on Twitter. There's a long series of those that have been successful. So I think the truth will come out at the end.